Today's video is section 10.3. We're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. So you've actually already learned all the steps for this. We're just going to be putting them together today. Sorry. All right. So we're going to solve by factoring. So notice we have a quadratic equation here, x squared minus 5x minus 50 equals 0. We are going to start by getting this in factored form. We want this to be in this form where we have standard form on one side. Remember, standard form just means highest exponent to lowest. And then we have our other side equaling 0. So if this were not in that form already, we would need to put it in that form. Since it already is, we can just look here at the left-hand side. We're going to x factor that. So a is 1 and c is negative 50. If I multiply 1 and negative 50, I get negative 50. B is negative 5. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 50 and add to negative 5. So I'm thinking here that would be negative 10 times 5. Negative 10 times 5 equals negative 50. Negative 10 plus 5 equals negative 5. So I would rewrite this as x minus 10 times x plus 5 equals 0. Oops. So now that I have this factored form here equaling 0, I can use the zero product property that we learned yesterday. So I know that the x values that make this equal 0 are going to be 10 and negative 5. Remember to set each of those factors equal to 0 and solve for x, which most of the time just means take this number and change its sign. However, if there's also a number in front of x, we have to be careful about that. We would actually have to set it equal and solve. All right, on our second one, we have 2x squared minus 5x minus 12. I want to first look for a common factor, but looks like 2, 5, and 12 do not have any do not have any common factors. So we're going to go ahead and x factor. A is 2, and c is negative 12. So 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and then add to b, which is negative 5. So try a few different things out. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. Looks like 3 and 8 would be our numbers. Because my 5 ends up negative, I would want the bigger number to be negative. So 3 plus negative 8 is equal to negative 5. So writing this in in factored form would be x plus 3 times x minus 8 equals 0. Don't forget to divide by a. So in the first example, a was 1, so dividing by a wouldn't change anything. In this example, our a does change. It's 2. So if it goes in evenly, go ahead and divide it in. So our second factor here would be x minus 4, because negative 8 divided by 2 is 4. X plus 3 halves, the 3 halves will not simplify, so move that 2 in front of x. So there's factored form. Now we just use that zero product property. So set 2x plus 3 equal to 0 and solve for x. We do the same thing with x minus 4, but since there's nothing in front of x on that one, we can also just change the sign. There's one of our zeros or solutions. On this side, I would subtract 3 from both sides. So 2x equals negative 3, and then divide by 2. So x equals negative 3 halves and 4. Okay, so really just putting together two things we've already learned in the past. Let's look at a couple that are in different forms here. So 4x squared plus 4x, that one doesn't have that c term. And since 4x squared and 4x have a common factor of 4x, we can go ahead and just pull that 4x out, which would leave x plus 1. Remember to check once you pulled out a greatest common factor, just double check. Make sure if you multiplied it back in, you get the same thing, 4x squared plus 4x, which we would. So 4x times x plus 1 equals 0 is factored form. Just take each factor and set it equal to 0 and solve for x. So if I divide both sides of this by 4, I know that 0 divided by 4 is 0. And if I subtract 1 from both sides here, x equals -1. Okay, our next example, x squared equals 4x plus 5. This one is not in the form that I need in order to start factoring. In order to start factoring, I need one side of this equation to equal 0, and I need the other side to be in standard form for a polynomial, which means highest exponent to lowest. I have two options here. I can either subtract x squared from both sides and move the x squared to this side, or I can move 4x and 5 to the left. Either one will work. I have the tendency to like to keep my x squared term positive, so I'm going to leave x squared on this side and I'm going to subtract 4x minus 5 from both sides of the equation. So x squared minus 4x minus 5, this side goes to 0. And now I have it in standard form with one side equaling 0. Again, I could have also changed or subtracted x squared from both sides and had negative x squared plus 4x plus 5. That would also work. But I just like to keep my x squared term positive, so that's why I chose to move 4x and 5 over. So now I can go ahead and x factor. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 1 times -5 and add to -4. So that would give me -5 and +1. So now I can go ahead and write this in factored form as x minus 5 times x plus 1. I would divide by a, but a is 1, won't change anything. So go ahead and solve this. X would be either 5 or -1. Those would be the two solutions that would make this equation equal 0. Okay. Negative x equals -6x squared plus 2. Again, it doesn't matter which direction I move things. Sometimes some people probably want to do it so that the x, they only had to move one term. I like to keep my x squared term positive, so in that case I'm going to be adding 6x squared and subtracting 2 from both sides. Now remember, I want this in standard form, so I would put these 6x squared first, the minus x second, and the minus 2 third, and that would equal 0. There are no common factors here, so I'm going to go ahead and x factor. A is 6 and C is -2. That would give me -12. B is -1. So two numbers that multiply to -12 and add to -1 would be 4 and 3 with a negative on the 4. So if I write that out, that would be x minus 4 times x plus 3 equals 0. Dividing each of those by a. Let's see, 4 over 6 reduces to 2/3, but still that 3 won't go away, or that it doesn't give me a whole number, so I'm going to move 3 in front of x. 3 over 6 simplifies to 1/2. Again, that 2 is going to go in front of x. So here I have 3x minus 2 times 2x plus 1 equals 0. The last step is to set each of these factors equal to 0 separately. So 3x minus 2 equal to 0. I would add 2 to both sides and divide by 3. So x equals 2/3 is one of my solutions. To get the other one, I'm going to move up here. 2x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract 1 from both sides and divide by 2. So x equals -1/2 is my other solution. All right, so for our final example today, I have 8x squared equals 40x minus 50. I need to move everything to the other side so that I can get it in standard form with one side equal to 0. Always need to start with that step when solving by factoring. So 8x squared minus 40x plus 50 equals 0. Please cancel on this side. So I'm going to first look for a common factor. I think the largest common factor for 8, 40, and 50 is actually 2. So I'll bring out a 2. That will leave me 4x squared minus 20x plus 25 equals 0. Now I'll x factor. So A is 4 and C is 25. 4 times 25 is 100. And I need two numbers that multiply to 100 and add to 20. So multiplying to 100 and adding to negative 20, what would that be? Let's see, 5 and 4. Oh, I think it's just 10 times 10. I would want them both negative because negative 10 times negative 10 gives me a positive 100, but negative 10 plus negative 10 gives me negative 20. So that 2 is still going to stay out here, floating out front. The rest would be x minus 10 times x minus 10. And then I would just have to divide each of those by a, which in this case is 4. And since 10 over 4 reduces to 5 over 2, I'm going to move that 2 in front of x on both of them. So this would be 2 times 2x minus 5, and then again 2x minus 5. So the 2 doesn't have an x with it, so that's not going to affect or have any part of our solution. But if I set 2x minus 5 equal to 0 and solve for x, I'd be adding 5 and dividing by 2. So x equals 5 halves. This one has one solution, but it happens twice, and that's okay. So it still has technically 2 solutions. They're just both 5 halves. So I just need to write it one time. All right, guys, good luck. Try today's assignment and let me know if you have any questions. You're always welcome to email me and we can set up a time to meet if you are still struggling. So have a great day.